Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and later in the program we will be featuring one of the Street Talk interviews that we recorded last December. And this will be with members of the public in the Bourke St Mall in the city of Melbourne. But for now, our guest is Russ Townsend, an expert in Eastern philosophy and spirituality. Russell, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Gavin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And we had a bit of a chat before, and you've got a wonderful young family.
Do indeed. I've got two young boys, yes. Harrison and Skylar, who are 7 and 8 years old right now, and my beautiful wife, Ida.
Wonderful. Well, we hope that they're going to be watching and taking in everything that Dad says tonight.
Oh, they will.
Okay. Well, now, there was a point as you're raising your two sons, and you say to yourself, I don't want them to fall into the trap. Now, what was the trap you were describing to me? Well,
this culture we currently live in here in Australia is very much focused around the material objectives of life, very much focused around going out and getting a job and chasing after basically material possessions and all of the good things that the material world has to offer, but predominantly divorced from any understanding around spirituality. And I feel that it's very important for them to be correctly introduced to a worldview which includes the spiritual dimension.
Okay. Now, for you to come to this point, and the children are aged
7 and 8.
7 and 8. Okay, something must have gone on in the past. So I'm going to take our viewers back to, let's say, 1988. Where was your journey that led you to this conclusion?
Well, 1988, I was 19 years of age. I'd left Australia and I was living in London at the time. I basically wanted to travel the world, and I was curious about the world and life, as I guess most young people are, and wanting to explore, and so I was living there and travelling around, doing the backpacking thing on a bit of a working holiday, and just through the experience of meeting different types of people and having all kinds of different discussions and questioning, raising questions about life, the universe and everything, I suppose, I started to become interested in Eastern philosophy and Eastern spirituality.
Okay. Well, let's come back to 2014 for a moment. Where do you see this trap leading to, our materialistic search, hunt, desire, hunger for?
Would you mean where it leads to as a society in general, or where it's going to lead to for the individuals?
As a society and for the individual. Let's cover both.
Well, I think we're already there in a lot of ways. The society has become more and more self-focused. In fact, I've recently heard on Radio National a series of studies have been done demonstrating that our current generation is more narcissistic than previous generations, exacerbated by things like Facebook and image crafting and so forth. The problems that young people today most focus on are really very much focused around what they can get for themselves, rather than as much about problems in the world in general, about the environment or about disarmament and things like that, which were issues which were a lot under discussion when I was growing up in the 80s.
Okay, well, let's go back to Europe, 1988. You're starting to backpack, travel, and take this interest in Eastern philosophy and spirituality. What steps did you take towards that?
Well, I really started out from a very atheistic point of view. I was more or less raised an atheist. I was very much into science, and I read books like The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. And also very convinced by this, mechanistic view of the world. But I found it very empty and very devoid of any real purpose or meaning in life. So by exposure to a more spiritual understanding of the world, I started to realise this key point, that it's a logical fallacy to conclude that since there are only certain things that we can measure using our scientific methodologies, empirical science that is, that's the only thing, that those things are the only things which are actually real, and that there is nothing beyond that. So I became interested in exploring other methods for gaining information or understanding about what might be beyond the purview of empirical science.
All right. Now, there was an important winner of a Nobel Prize who began to, from this position that you find yourself in, began to research. What did he discover? Well,
of course, a lot of people assume that empirical science has got it all tied up in terms of understanding where consciousness comes from. People assume that consciousness arises out of a complex, a super complex arrangement of material elements, the elements of the brain, the neurons and electrochemical discharges which flow through the brain. People don't really understand how it works, but there's an assumption there that basically consciousness is a meta phenomenon arising out of a complex arrangement of biological circuitry of the brain. And they assume, the average man on the street seems to think that scientists have really concluded this. A lot of scientists actually do assume it, but what we find out that is at the highest levels of the scientific community, there is an understanding, there is an acknowledgement that we do not actually even have a proper theoretical understanding of how consciousness could possibly arise out of the combination of material elements. So this is demonstrated by, as you mentioned, Nobel Prize winning neuroscientist Sir John Eccles, who's written a book in collaboration with philosopher Karl Popper called The Self and Its Brain, where he proposes, he examines all of the problems and all the different theories that scientists have put forward in order to explain how consciousness could arise out of matter, and how all of those theories are flawed in different ways and can't possibly explain it. And so then he proposes an alternative theory that the actual essence of the self, the essence of consciousness or the source of consciousness, is metaphysical and beyond the merely physical realm.
Well, Russell, we'll come back and open it up further. Okay. You've been watching Support Life. We'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and our guest today is Russ Townsend. Now, Russell, we're talking about Sir John Eccles and his theory. Is there any empirical evidence to this thought?
Well, that's a very good question there, Gavin. In fact, there is, and it's something which a lot of people just aren't aware of, that there have been scientific-based research into this area. Of course, one of the problems with the scientific community is that if you start to do serious studies in areas which are outside of what is accepted normal science, then you effectively get excommunicated from the scientific community and get labelled a crackpot and non-scientific and so forth. And you basically, they're not going to be your friends anymore, right? So and then any of the work that you produce will be disparaged, which is one of the problems of getting this kind of information out into the public. But yes, there's been many different kinds of studies along these lines. For many years throughout the history of mankind, there have been reports of people having encountered life-threatening situations, including heart attacks, car accidents, injuries during warfare and so forth, where they have reported having an experience of being outside of their body. and having been able to witness the goings-on around their physical body, having been able to observe their own physical body from a point above the body, and being able to see what's going on around it. So there's a particular cardiologist, a case in point is a cardiologist by the name of Michael Sabin. Over the course of 20-odd years, as a cardiologist, had heard many stories along these lines. And he, being a scientific person, he didn't really believe any of it. But he got to a point where he started to get very curious about it, and he was actually looking to debunk the whole idea. So he set up an experiment where he put a control group of seasoned cardiac arrest patients against a group of cardiac arrest patients that claim to have these experiences of out-of-body experiences. And he devised a series of questions for them. In a nutshell, the control group were not able to answer the questions accurately about what happened in the resuscitation procedure, what happened in their particular instance, and so forth. They weren't able to give any accurate or detailed information, whereas those who had the out-of-body experiences were able to give very accurate visual and audio information about what was said, where people were standing, and even up to the details of objects that are sitting on shelves in the operating theatre that would normally be out of view from a person standing on the floor.
Well, now that's more than interesting. So we're talking about the spirit of a person, the soul of a person. What would we call that?
Michael Sabin, the gentleman that conducted this experiment, concluded in his report that perhaps this does demonstrate quite clearly that there is more to the human being than simply a biological system, and that perhaps what has been discovered here is in fact the soul or the spiritual essence of the living force of the human being that would warrant further study. Was where he left it in his report, basically.
Okay. Well, now let's come back to what we'd call the person. Where does a person begin? How does life begin for a person, and this out-of-the-body experience, how are we going to tie the two in? Okay,
well, this is a very important question in relation to the pro-life discussion. Of course, a lot of the debate around abortion is at what stage in the development of the fetus within the womb does it become a person? Is it actually a human being? Is it alive? Is it conscious? And at what stage does it have rights? Now, of course, there's anywhere along the scale between the moment of conception to the moment of birth. And I find it quite incredible, virtually inconceivable, that in this state we allow people to have an abortion right up until birth. So just if we pick anywhere along the scale, they've picked the most extreme point on that scale by which a person can conduct an abortion, which to me is absolutely astounding. But it all comes from this issue around, well, what is a person? What is human life? Ultimately, the question of what is consciousness and what is a person is central to really defining exactly this question. Okay, if we try to define the world in terms of material biological systems, then it's very hard to decide where to draw the line. But when we understand that the person isn't simply a biological machine, but is a spiritual being inside a biological machine, then it becomes a very different discussion.
So life then is precious from what point for you?
Well, my understanding is that the spiritual living force enters the fetus at the moment that the conditions for life become possible, which is at the moment of conception.
Russell, as you were studying Eastern philosophy, you were a monk, and your in-depth study brought you to what conclusions?
Well, that was a very, very interesting and enlightening time. to get very absorbed in the philosophy about life and spirituality. And I guess one of the most important, significant, overarching principles behind all of that is about the sacredness and sanctity of life. Generally, I think it's a fairly universal principle, whether you're into Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or whatever kind of style of spirituality or tradition that you may belong to. At one end of the spectrum, you have peace and non-violence and respect for life is generally considered to be good by people universally everywhere. Whereas at the other end of the spectrum, where people are mostly just interested in their own selfish gains of wealth and power and chasing after consumer goods, and if violence is involved in that to get other people out of the way, then so be it. That's considered to be, generally universally, to be considered very bad type of behaviour.
Thanks, Russ, for simply reminding us of the sanctity of life and where that begins.
You're most welcome, Gavin.
You're watching Support Life, and that's all for our conversation with Russ until next week. But stay tuned, because after the break we will be back with one of the Street Talk interviews that we recorded last December with members of the public in the Bourke St Mall in Melbourne.
On Support Life, a program on Channel 31. Welcome, Stuart.
It's nice to be part of the show, thank you.
So the first question today is, do you consider you value human life, and why?
Yes, I think it's the most precious form of life as we know it on earth, I guess.
Tell us, what do you know about the current abortion law in Victoria?
Not as much as I probably should know, so I don't know much at all.
Have you or anyone you know ever been affected by the loss of a loved one? And how did that make you feel?
In regards to abortion or just normal?
Or either.
Or any loss of life?
Any kind of death? Or
yes, well, my mum just passed away 8 weeks ago, so...
How did that make you feel?
Very, very sad, very sad. I had to go overseas, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to deal with. So, yeah.
Do you know of anyone who has been affected by abortion?
No.
If you heard that a pregnant woman died in a car accident, for example, would you consider the child in her womb as a second death?
Yes.
Why?
It's a life that's been taken away.
Would you say, is it safe to say that at 3 to 6 months, it's a baby in a womb?
Yes.
When do you think human life begins?
I think at the point of conception, really. Yes, at the point of conception it starts.
Under what circumstance would it be justifiable to terminate a child in the womb?
If it affects the health of the mother, then I think the mother must come first.
And would it be justifiable for gender selection?
Yeah, these tough questions.
So, for example, if I decided that I was pregnant with a baby girl and I wanted a boy instead, is that okay to abort the baby?
Oh, definitely not, no.
Do you think people are influenced by political and social pressures to abort a child?
In some cases, probably, I think they are. It depends on the circumstances of that particular, I guess, pregnant mum or family, you know. So, yeah, I think socially, I think some things, some people would be influenced by that, depending on the conditions or the situation.
In Australia, 100,000 unborn children are aborted yearly. What do you think of this?
As a number, it's pretty horrific, but to break it down would probably be you'd have a better understanding of why and what the justification was for each and individual case.
And if another sector of our human race were so mistreated, would you be motivated to stand up for people's rights, especially for the unborn?
100,000 deaths is, as again, getting back to the conditions of the situation, and you know what circumstances are involved. Then it needs to be. Look, the number 100,000, it terrifies me. It's horrible, but we need to understand the data, or the information behind it.
Did you know it's legal in Victoria to abort a child right up to the moment of birth?
No, I didn't know that, and that horrifies me even more. However, again, it gets back to the circumstance.
Why does it horrify you?
It depends. Well, again, it depends on, like, for example, I've got a very close family friend, right, who where it was explained that the baby in the womb wasn't. What could you say? It was very. They knew that it was going to be mentally, physically, probably disabled is the wrong word, but challenged, and they went ahead and had the child. But when you look at the child, based on medical advice and the best medical advice that was given at the time, was that right? Or was it wrong? I mean, you've got to look at the quality of life and things like that. So that's where it becomes difficult to make a decision. You know, if you know all of that, like personally, I would think, I've got to be careful too, I would think, what's in the best interest of the child? The child's got to be first, right? For a child to be aborted up to the minute of birth horrifies me if the circumstances don't want it, you know? If it's not justified, then it's completely wrong. That's what I think anyway.
Thank you so much for your time today, Stuart. You're great.
Okay, thank you very much.